So, Jenna, I have to say that I've been really sitting with where to start this conversation because your creativity moves in many directions. You've published poetry, you've published essays about your life buying 160 acres, essay about traveling to the Arctic Circle. You live on an off-grid organic farm, like so many things to be fascinated with. So in the end, I thought I would begin with your teaching and your mentoring, slightly because I thought to myself, I think I'm going to learn a lot if I go with this subject area. So this is for my audience, but this is also for me as well.
Oh, I love that. Teacher to teacher and mentor to mentor. I like that so much.
So let's start with, I had a little look at what you offer as a mentor, and I was like, some really juicy things that you offer. And I think one thing that is super interesting is this idea of accountability, because obviously many writers struggle to stay on track with their projects. And as someone who's clearly both prolific but also able to juggle working on simultaneous projects, that's my perception. How do you stay on track?
Oh boy. Lots of scheduling, lots of calendars, lots of conversations with the people that I'm working with as in mentorship and in editing relationships. And I think part of it is also working on the farm, because this time of year is the start of our planting season. And if I'm not organized, we are lost because there's so much to do in a very short space. So I kind of allow what's happening in the garden to tell me about the times when I have to be really, really focused. And that kind of, I don't know how useful that is as a teaching strategy, but I think because both of us are really connected to the seasons and to the land, and we might find like the pacing, what's required of us in terms of our energy, in terms of tasks, shifts depending on the season. Like I find this time of year, I'm gravitating towards working outside, and I know a lot of people are starting to think about maybe a holiday. The kids are starting to head towards the end of school. So mentoring shifts gears a little bit. People take more time away. I redirect to the garden. End of the season, I get the sense of people pulling inwards because here our winter is so profound and it's so long. And people are gathering themselves for being that inside in that long dark for 7 months of the year. So the scheduling is very much like how to hold a safe space, thinking about bringing myself out of the garden into the desk space, and, really kind of loading myself up on tasks, but always thinking about how to hold a warm and a welcoming space, knowing that all of us are going into the dark quite literally for a really long time. So I guess, everything I do with teaching, with mentoring, with writing, with work on the farm, it is grounded in the land. It's grounded in seasonal patterns and cycles and how they inform the body.
This is so delicious, because when you mention scheduling, and my mind was like, yeah, I know that one struggle that can happen with scheduling is, sure, you put it in the diary, but then the day arrives and you look at what you're meant to do that day and you don't feel like it. But then you added the fact that seasonally nature is there as a, nature is often a lot softer than that, but like a bit of a kick up the arse, because it's like, you've got to do this because you also need to make sure things get planted. And what that made me think about was, often if a writer sees something in the calendar, and I know because I've done this myself, and then the day comes and you see it there and there's that kind of draining feeling. Like for me, I know that's my nervous system shutting down because I'm scared.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I'm like, I don't feel like it. But if you've got that extra accountability of, if I don't get this done, then those seeds are not going to get in the soil, and then the repercussions of that,
Yeah.
It's interesting that there's a sort of accountability from nature.
Yeah, there is. And I think a lot about hard deadlines and soft deadlines, you know? Like I think about the ones where our growing season is so short. We have maybe, if we're lucky, 2.5 months, and then that's it. So yeah, I think about the deadlines where if I miss this by a week, then I'm done for a year. And then I think about the deadlines that are a bit softer, and some of those are in the body. This time of year after that really tight clenching of just getting through the winter, and now we have these long, light summer days. The light is up almost till midnight this time of the year. And people want to be outside. And I've had some of my colleagues that I work with in mentoring have said, can we push back by a week? I need to be out in the sun. And like, you know what, if we don't have a hard deadline we're working towards, a publisher's deadline or something, yes. Like get your body out there, let it fill up how it needs to fill up, because it means you'll bring more to the page when we meet. So that sense of what's hard, what needs to be done in order to have some kind of flourishing, like with the garden. And then what also the softer deadlines, what allowances do we need to make so that there can be that kind of flourishing in us, That's not too esoteric out there. Yeah.
No, and also what landed with me, Jenna, was when you talked about that clenching to get through the winter. One of the things that has been really recurring in my healing journey is a holding pattern. And it is that clenching. So I will find myself literally, especially if my stress levels are up, I will find myself clenching just to get the motivation to go brush my teeth, because it's just such a pattern. This kind of like, oh, I've got something I need to do, let's clench and let's go and do it.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'll find myself holding the muscles as if I need to go to the toilet and I don't need to go to the toilet, and I'm like, oh, there's some clenching going on down there. Yep. And it's so hard for me to just soften. That's why breath work has been my absolute savior. But it sounds to me that you've got into a sense of that rhythm, that you understand, okay, there is a clench that's going to get me through the winter, but then there's a trust that the softening is going to happen. Have you found that, or is that something that you've also had to work with your body to kind of let your body know, okay, we can soften now?
There are many times when that clench is quite literal, because it gets so cold here. This is part of what we've been experiencing with climate change. Our winters are now twice as cold, literally twice as cold. So yeah, this past winter, we actually went down to minus 60 Celsius for a couple of days. And previously, when, all through my childhood, if we would hit minus 25 or minus 28, that was like, ooh, that's cold. Wow. So we're seeing these extremes of temperature. And so your body can't help but clench, because at that temperature, nothing wants to be alive outside, So yeah, you really, really have to. And we're off grid. We're in a rural property. So there's nobody here. You have to be very intentional about finding people and finding community. Otherwise, you could be here on your own all winter. So there's that very much that like, okay, I know this is scary. I know this is long. Our days in the winter are so short. They're about 5 hours of daylight. I know it's kind of like a long dark. So what can you do in terms of inside, in terms of how you watch the world, how you engage with it, small rituals, finding community, all those things that allow for a kind of, just a little bit of opening in the chest. Because otherwise, sometimes you feel like you could be clenched up basically from, September to May. Just getting through. Yeah.
Wow. That really helps put it into perspective for me. And this sort of sense of those kind of almost miniature cycles throughout a winter's day of like, where can I find some light, some warmth, some connection, so that I can bring in some daily softening to balance out that clenching.
Yeah.
It does seem to mirror the creative process.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. With how you come to the page and what you feel about your project, and if it's bringing you that kind of, that beginner's mind where you start and you don't have a sense of the boundaries yet. And so it's a bit nerve-wracking, but it's also really energizing. And sometimes you come to the page with that sense of beginner's mind. You just like want to play. And other times you're so aware of a deadline or an expectation, or you've boxed yourself into a form that's not working in a particular piece of writing, or something's not happening and you can tell, and everything just buckles down. Yeah.
Yeah. And then, of course, I'm thinking, because for me, when I find myself in that buckled down place, in that place where I've trapped myself, like you said, with a form or some kind of conceit that I'm just like, why did I think that was a good idea? For me, it's about getting outside. But if it's minus 60 out there and pitch black, what do you do?
You know what? I still go out. This is going to sound wild, but we do live off the grid, so we are wood heated only. So I still have to go out and chop wood. So I have a heavy duty snowmobile suit that I'll put on, and I still have to go out and chop wood, and I still have to bring in water from town because in the winter everything's frozen. And I turn towards things like candles. I turn towards solar lanterns. I go out snowshoeing sometimes by the full moon. It's exquisite, even though it's really bitterly cold. But I think what I find is that my vision changes in the winter time, and I find that it's kind of an unconscious lesson, but I guess it is like a lesson for the rest of the year. Like, you have to work so hard to find beauty, to find ease, to find comfort here in the winter. The colors are very reduced. The light is very reduced. There's this constant sense of the outside wanting to come in, and in a very threatening way. Minus 60 can stay outside my house, please. But I find if I can kind of open to it, or at least come to kind of an agreement with it, then the rest of the year, like now when it's, plus 20 and it's blue sky and it's sunny and gorgeous and the garden is booming, and I think those lessons in seeing and those lessons in waiting and watching and just opening through difficult times now stand me in good stead, because my heart center is just completely open,
I love that idea of those lessons in seeing, where you've had to retrain to really search out the beauty, because it made me have a real rethink of the states where I'm taking something for granted, and I'm looking at something so beautiful, but my brain is like looking at the scratch or the dent or the thing that isn't beautiful in that scene, whereas you're literally talking about the reverse. What a beautiful skill.
Yeah, and I didn't even think of it as a skill. I think, honestly, that's where the land continues to teach me so much. And I always acknowledge, too, that I'm a newcomer to this place, too. So this is teaching me so much. And I think about the communities, the non-Indigenous and the settler communities, but particularly the Indigenous communities here, who have learned from the land and come up alongside the land. And it gives me that sense of beginner's mind again, like I'm going to hopefully, knock on wood, spend my life in this place. But even then, like, it kind of gives you that sense of humility. Like, there's so much more to learn.
Yeah.
And gratitude. And I actually like being in that sense of beginner's mind when it comes to place, I
love that. Let me come back to your mentoring, Jenna.
Sure.
So we've looked at staying accountable, the scheduling. You also you did mention having conversations. I didn't pick up on that one. You were like, conversations with the people who are holding you accountable, your own mentors. Now, here's something I was really fascinated with on your website. You said that you offer guidance on manuscript trajectory. And I was like, ooh, tell us more about that. What do you mean by manuscript trajectory? What does that look like?
I guess I would say I've been very fortunate to have worked alongside writers from all different backgrounds and all different voices for a really long time. I mean, I've been working in the writing community here for almost 40 years. And so I had the gift of coming up in the writing community. And so over time, I think just by reading and by listening and going to readings and sharing work, you start to, you develop that sense of when something is ringing true. It's like you hear it when, say, for example, you're working on an essay, you're working on a poem, and you get exactly the right cadence. You're like, that's it. This is where I need to stop. It's like somebody's rung a bell somewhere off stage. And I think you just over time and over practice, you get more and more attuned to that. And so when I talk about manuscript trajectory, it's that sense that when I'm listening to someone explain their project and reading the work that they're sharing with me and anticipating like which chapters are they going to build, or what themes are they going to attend to or follow. I think as a mentor, you get the same sense of when something rings clear and someone comes to you with all of these ideas, excuse me, all of these ideas and all of this work, and they say like, I could go in that direction or that direction or that direction. And you sit and you listen. I find mentoring is such a process of listening. Like if I can set my intentions and my ego to the side and just say, what are you telling me? What do I hear the work telling me? And that trajectory at some point comes clear. And then all I do is I just kind of nudge people and I say, from your enjoyment or your excitement or your energy or the way the work is leading, this feels like the path. This feels like where that bell is ringing. And I guess the thing that I can perhaps bring is the sense I've been on the path a little bit longer, and I can usually see a few steps farther than perhaps the person I'm working with. And it's just through practice and being in community and working. And I feel like if I'm doing my work right, they'll be doing the same thing someday. They'll have that sense of the path ahead before it kind of unfolds. I hope that's not too cryptic.
No, I get this real sense of a very special kind of listening.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And sensing into something, because I think like what comes to me is almost when I'm like, I do a lot of ecstatic dance. So when I'm in a rhythm with the music, so I'm listening to the music on an audio level, but I'm very much listening with my body, and I can sense when I start a movement and I'm like, no, I've lost it. I've lost the truth. I'm just moving for the sake of it now, or I'm moving because I think someone's watching me right now, or I'm moving because I was like, this is a cool move. This is going to make me look good. And so I have to kind of come back to find that place where I'm moving from that center of truth. Mm-hmm. And when you talked about listening to a client who's like, I could go here or I could go here, I think there's a real difference between our ego guiding a project, our, if to talk of my own past, like our own not being seen as a child, it can influence the direction that we want to take a project because we want to be seen or impressive. So there's lots of things that can influence where a project goes, but without that space holder for us to kind of sense, no, that doesn't feel, that doesn't feel like the ding. No, that doesn't feel like the ding either. Yeah. I don't know. Am I getting you?
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's that sense of listening, and almost because you've been listening for so long, you're talking to the person you're working with and saying like, which of these sounds true in terms of this project? And alongside that, which of these sounds true? What are your intentions for the project, and what is your responsibility to it? And sometimes I'll work with people and I'll say, I need you to go away and write about this and think about this and really clarify what your intentions are and kind of sift through those layers. Is it, I've been writing for 10 years, I haven't got a book out, and I feel like I have to do a really big boom somehow, and it's got to have all the bells and whistles. And I'm like, is that doing due diligence to the story? Or, you're adding too much extra kind of bulk to the story. When you really have a good story, you don't need all that stuff. So what are your intentions? And then what sounds true? What sounds clear? And usually people can get there themselves. And sometimes it just takes, someone who's been kind of doing that work on their own and who's been mentoring with their own mentors over time to pass that on.
Can you think of a time with one of your own projects, whether it's one of your essay collections or your poetry collections, where you had to have a moment of pause because you were being taken in a direction and you had to come back and be like, what's the intention here? What's the truth?
Yeah. And you know what? I might just very gently just kind of mention, like, just kind of give a gentle trigger warning that I am going to talk briefly about hard times and just lightly touch on some abuse experiences myself. I just want to just put that out there for people to caretake themselves as they're listening.
Thanks, Jenna.
Yeah. But when I was writing Reverie, you mentioned some of my books of essays, and Reverie, A Year of Bees. This is the book of essays about our beekeeping experience here on the farm. And it's such a little book. Like, you look at it and you think, wow, that she probably wrote that over like 6 months or something. And it took me, 4 years, because it had a completely different form, because I wasn't listening to the collection well enough. And I think in that sense, I had been gifted a number of stories from community members who had been beekeepers or were beekeepers, and I really wanted to attend to their stories, and I was trying to, like, shove them into the form of this essay collection, which looks at, bees as representations of the spirit, and beekeeping and environmental crisis and all of these things. And I was trying to shoehorn all these stories in it. It just felt like a dog's breakfast. Like, this manuscript was going down spectacularly. And I thought, okay, I want to honor these stories, so I've started putting them out as standalone essays into the world, because I do want to do right by those stories. The book manuscript wasn't the right place for them, though. And ultimately, what I was dodging in the book manuscript, when I was talking about how all of these people came to beekeeping and why one might want to work with bees, because physically it's a difficult process, even though there's this beautiful kind of spiritual connection. And my publisher pointed out, you're telling everyone else's stories and you are studiously ducking around your own story, which is, I came to beekeeping because I'm a long-term abuse survivor. And beekeeping, I needed something that would teach me something of the spirit, but it would also get me not comfortable with, but able to move through pain, right? In the sense of the small bee sting, but if, like, anyone who's been, traumatized knows that even the smallest wound you can numb out, or it can open up like a pit under your feet. So that's why I went to beekeeping, and my publisher, who's also my editor, she said, the big gap in this is your story. And I'm like, I know. She said, you know what you have to do. And I said, yeah, I do. So I went back and I included that story, but I wanted to talk about all of these elements of beekeeping. So I had to be really careful about bringing that story in, but not in the sense of introducing a cannonball into my boat kind of thing. You know what I mean? A story like that can take your manuscript down. So I had to weave the entire collection differently. And so I hadn't been listening to it because I had been afraid of what I needed to bring to it in order to have an honest collection. And it took, again, someone that I would consider a mentor and a really lovely editor to just gently point it out and say, you know what you need to do. And I was like, yes, I do. So
thank you for sharing that. It so resonates with me, this idea of having a call to create something, to write something, and then what that journey is there to do for me in terms of to heal, to reveal, to work through. In my avoidance of it, the creative project starts to look very different, and it's very hard to come back from that place I think without that safe help, without the advice of someone that you trust, because I think our unconscious is so effective. It's so effective at keeping us safe. So we've got this kind of intuitive desire to do something that is going to create the healing journey that we need, because the body is so intelligent. It knows what it needs. It knows where it needs to put itself. Do you remember the sort of first urge that you had to write this collection? Can you go right back to the start?
Yeah. I think, again, it was that sense of beginner's mind. I never really intended to write about the farm or to teach about the farm, because, again, I always feel like I'm learning, and people often turn to you and say, well, you must know about this. I'm like, I'm new to this landscape too. And I can be a companion. I don't ever really want to be top down, like, you know, what I have to say is the be all and the end all. No. So I think it took me a while to wrap my head around the idea of, one, people actually really like that sense of being walked along with. You know, here are some of the things we're learning. This is the mind state we're in. Not so much this is our, you know, our 100% expertise on the topic and it's inviolable. It's like, here's what we tried. Here's the sense of mind we developed over time that allows us to do this work. And here are some of the really big mistakes we made as well. So, you know, just to kind of bring someone along. So we started keeping bees, and I thought I would love to see if I could do that as well, and just not write to an expert community, because there are people who are much more knowledgeable than I, and not write to try and convince people to kind of come in if they really don't like bees. But all the people who have heard about bees or stopped to watch bees, you know, or read about bees in the news being under threat, colony collapse disorder, what have you, and are intrigued but don't know where to go. I thought I want to walk alongside those people. And that's really where the book came from. That was kind of its genesis, you know. Yeah.
It's beautiful. I'm getting a sense as I listen to you of the sort of the intended trajectory, and then your sort of plans to sort of take it off trajectory, but how you were kind of brought back by your mentor.
Yeah.
So we've got the manuscript trajectory, but now I'm thinking of feedback as well, because obviously you had conversations with your mentor. You've talked about clients sharing work with you. I know that's something that you offer. With feedback, do you have a sense of what makes your feedback unique? Not as a kind of like, oh, well, you know, like I'm the best, but, you know, just a sense of like, what's Jenna's feedback like? What is it about you and the way that you see and how you offer that to your clients that is so you?
I think I would say I try to, my hope is that I can go deep again to that sense of, this portion of the manuscript seems like it's working against your intentions here, and be incisive, but I don't feel the need to break people apart. I think the writing world, the publishing world can do that effectively for us sometimes. And I've seen people respond really badly to that. I've taught writing in schools and, you know, post-secondary for a long time too, and I've watched what happens to people where you take that wonder away and say, you know, your skill isn't equal to your wonder. And it's just like, holy smokes, you can take the wind out of someone's sails. So I think if my feedback can be incisive and it can get to the heart of something without saying, I need to pull everything away you think you know about yourself, or you do know about yourself as a writer, in order to point this out. I don't want to do that. So I build on what I see already working, but I'm not afraid to go to the heart of something and say, you know, you set the story up in this way, and this seems to fly right in the face of that. Why are you doing that? Have you thought about it? You know? Yeah.
That's so interesting to me. The way that you described that kind of balance between skill and wonder, I was like, oh, I love the way that you phrase that. The sense of, am I understanding you right? Where it's like, here's the experience I want to give, here's what I want to create on the page, but I'm not quite yet able to do that.
Yep, absolutely. Because I think about all the different backgrounds people are coming from. You know, people come in with all different skill sets, and they might have fascination or expertise on a particular subject, but they might not have what we might consider, you know, the specific tools that are needed to write a solid manuscript. They might not know how. Maybe they're new to it. Maybe they come from a culture that tells stories differently. You know, and so often what I see in publishing is this kind of, it's still this rigidness, it's this unwillingness to bend. It's, if we don't fit inside this particular writing background, then what we have to say is never going to be bigger than our lack of skill in saying it. And you know what I mean? And that cuts out so many of us. It says, if you don't have a certain level of education, you can't write. If you don't come from a particular background or a particular canon, if you come from an oral culture, you know, It cuts out so many voices. And so I'm always looking for ways in which I can teach someone skills. You know, I've been doing that for years. I can teach someone form and skills and this and that and how to write a cover letter and how to approach a publisher. I cannot give somebody that wonder about their subject and that deep, deep need to tell a story. I've seen a lot of really technically brilliant writers with no juice in that story. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'd much rather have the reverse, someone who has that big desire to tell a story, and something profound to say or an experience to bring to the page, but needs to learn the skills to say it. That's a different thing.
What a powerful distinction. And what's coming up for me, Jenna, is when you talk about the need to tell a story, part of my journey as a writer has been learning to write from my truth and not my trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm curious, when it comes to need, how do you negotiate that, where you've got someone like me several years ago who's telling a story because they're like, please see me, know what happened to me, versus a different kind of need, which might be a sense of how can I write this story in a way that's going to help other people and not just help myself.
Oh, I absolutely hear that. I was actually having a conversation with someone that I'm working with that is also, you know, becoming a dear friend as well. That's one of the lovely things about the mentorship process often. Not too long ago, we were talking about that, and that fine line between you come in with something that's so big and you just like, yeah, see me or see this or someone witness this. And the light goes in this way. And what's missing is the light that also goes out to the reader. You know what I mean? And so I found when I was talking with this writer, and I was saying we need to make this distinction between when are you writing something, you want to get it down on the page, and the page is a kind of witnessing as well. It takes it out of here and it puts it down on the page, and it says, it takes away a little bit of the power. It takes away a little bit of the hurt. And it's almost like the page is a kind of witness too, because it's that whole process of like, you pull it out of yourself and pop it on the page. And sometimes it feels like, you know, you're writing, I don't know how to describe it. It's a very visceral process, writing that pain onto the page. But there's the difference between that immediacy. It's almost like our journal writing, our writing that we do to our most intimate selves, and the page. And that's the writing that turns the light inward and it illuminates us, and it says, we need to be witnessed. And then that writing that also shines some of that light outward, and it says, how is the reader encountering this? You know, how do I caretake the reader as well? Because the other thing I think about that type of writing where we are holding so much pain is however we have held that, whether that's with deep trauma or whether we've come to some sort of regard of that pain, or whether we've come along a healing journey, we've sat with it probably a bit longer than our reader has sat with it. You know, so how do we caretake ourselves in the telling and caretake our readers in the receiving? And I think that's where that writing shifts. It becomes aware of, now I'm telling it to someone else, and I have a responsibility, and I also have to be aware not just of what I need, but what they need in order to hold that story, because they are so new to it, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The way that you describe that, Jenna, I've got like light bulbs going off left, right, and centre. Because when you talk about this idea of how do we caretake the reader, if we don't yet know how to caretake ourselves, we don't know what softness and holding to offer the reader as we give them our story.
Exactly.
And I think that's so crucial to be able to understand, because often, and I witness this a lot when I'm holding space with people's healing journeys, we are so harsh with ourselves. Why am I like this? Why am I doing this? Because that's often what our pain received when we were younger, and that's all we know. So in the absence of knowing how to be soft with ourselves, it can be difficult to be soft with the reader.
Yeah. And then you end up traumatizing, or sometimes even re-traumatizing your reader, whom they might come to your book because they connect with your story. And then all of a sudden it's just, boom, they get bulldozed by your book. And you think, that's what happened to me, but I also didn't want to pass that on. I wanted to pass on something, more than that, something that took that and turned it somehow,
Yeah.
Yeah.
When you're in that space with a writer, so it might be that you're giving them feedback in this vein. You're like, okay, we've got the skill, you've got the wonder. That's fantastic. You've got a really beautiful need here to want to write the story. We've been working on your skills, but you're getting a sense of like, oh, this is a harsh reading experience. And you've got a sense of like, this isn't yet something they have experience of. They're not yet in a place of knowing how to love themselves in a healthy way, in a non-destructive way. How do you navigate that, where it's not just a writing skill, it's a way of being as well that they need to learn?
Yeah. I've come through some pretty involved memoir projects with colleagues and friends who are navigating those types of stories where, the story itself is not done. It's going to unfold. It's going to come to a resolution at some point down the line, but right now that's not what the time scale is. They're still very much living alongside some of it. And with the people, I would say with all writers, but particularly with people who are telling a story that there's threads of it that are still unfolding in their lives. I look at half what's going on the page, and I find often for writers who are telling those stories, sometimes even just coming to the page and getting that work out is a kind of learning to hold some softness for themselves, because they take something like, when it's living in you, it's just you, nobody can see that, and you can't see the entirety of it. And then whether you take your dictaphone, oh gosh, I'm old, or you take your iPhone or whatever and you record it, or whether you write it down on the page, you get it outside of yourself in some way, you can start to see the coastline of it. You know what I mean? You can start to get a sense of where the edges are. And you can I think you start to get a little bit of a sense of the scale of what you're coping with. And along with that, over time, I think might come a bit of, if not gentleness, at least understanding. So there's the part of getting it out and just seeing the form that it takes and seeing the scope of how big it is outside of you. Because when it's inside of you, it feels like it encompasses all of you, And then telling the writer or working with the writer and saying, so what are your other supports? You as the being writing this story, how are you able to perhaps be held up by community or, by loved ones or by a really good counselor who can walk you through things in a way that I as a writer can't necessarily do, or the things that you love that fill you up as a being in the world, aside from your writerly self, which needs specific things. What fills you up? And you think sometimes with those really difficult stories, getting it outside, getting outside of you onto the page, and then remembering you get up from the desk and you are still a being in the world that has needs, and telling that story is going to really deplete your well, and you need to attend to those needs,
Yeah.
Spend time with loved ones, go for a walk, nourish yourself, cook a good meal or sleep, or all of these things that we, I think sometimes when we're writing, we don't always consider that the work that it actually is,
I'm so glad that you're mentioning this, Jenna, because one of the things that is really with me at the moment in terms of the trajectory that my work is taking is this idea that I see so many ways that we could be taking better care of our creative health.
Yeah.
So when you take a master's in this country, you were born in the UK, right?
I was, and I did a master's there too.
Oh, okay. So when you take a master's in creative writing, it's about the mind, it's about academic text, it's about the form, it's about structure, it's maybe some interesting modules. there isn't a class on creative and mental health, and I really would love to change that.
Yes,
You know, that
absolutely.
feels really important to me. So when you talk about like if someone's working on a memoir, I love the way you say when you can see the whole coastline. Yes, what a relief, because you're like, okay, great, this is it now. Versus like, oh my God, it's bottomless.
Yeah.
Where do I start?
Yeah.
But also that sort of taking care of yourself in between, because often not only do we not get taught how to take care of our creative health, but often writers can be the most merciless to their creative health.
So true.
Right?
Oh, yeah.
Because they're giving themselves a hard time. They're chaining themselves to the desk, but they're flipping between tabs on their browser because they're not writing. Therefore, they're just depleting themselves.
Yeah.
They're maybe drinking too much caffeine or alcohol, which is like liquid stress.
Yeah.
They're not sleeping well. They're keeping irregular hours. They're giving themselves a hard time. Yeah. So all of that is so destructive to creative health. So when you were talking, I was like, this is how to take care of yourself just as a writer as well, isn't it? Yeah. Not just if the story is depleting you, because I think whether it's a memoir or fiction, I think it all depletes us.
Absolutely, yeah. You think about creative disciplines as a whole, you know, unless we have a gallery or a publisher or someone out there kind of demand, for the most part, these are the disciplines where we are asked to be our own constant, harshest critic. You know, we have to inspire ourselves. We are, like you said, we're merciless with ourselves at times because there's nobody reaching into our lives and saying, well, have you done this today? You know, kind of thing. It has to be us, and we have to fill ourselves up, but we also have to drive ourselves. And I think it's so easy, you know, to tip the balance and end up really lopsided, where you're just driving, and then you almost look at, you know, that filling up process as kind of peripheral. I don't think it is. You know?
No, I don't think so either.
Yeah. I love what you said, though, that idea of that, you know, needing that care inside these programs that are guiding writers, because it feels like you're kind of just guiding younger writers into a brick wall, you know? You might produce some beautiful text, but also what's going to happen to you at the end of it. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for saying that, because sometimes I wonder, I'm like, oh, am I the only traumatized writer? Would I be the only student in my class? And yeah, I'm like, no. It can't just be me who needed trauma-informed creative writing masters.
I think a person in the world right now, coming to the page as a writer, is already carrying a lot, let alone all of our individual struggles, you know? I think like that collective and community care just in the world is so wise, and bringing it into our creative processes. Absolutely. You know? Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. How would you say your creative process has evolved as you've grown a deeper understanding of yourself, as you've come to live in this beautiful, deep connection with the land? I've had to be more patient with myself, that's for sure. And not to get to wax too lyric about it, but the land has taught me so much, just about the passage of seasons and about hard times. I look at the land as I'm working with it through the climate crisis and watching what the land is navigating because of what we've done as humans. And I think about the parallels in the body as a being in the world, as a writer. One of the experiences, I haven't mentioned it yet, I hope it's okay to mention it, but one of the experiences that's definitely colored how I write and how I read and how I am in the world is living through aggressive cancer that started basically when the pandemic did, and that fight is still ongoing. And so having driven myself as a writer and then running into the body absolutely saying, you cannot do this. Your brain is burnt out from chemotherapy. You can't do this. You're going to come to the page and the words are going to be doing, you know, donuts in the parking lot, as we say here, like just doing loop-the-loops. And you can come in with all your intentions and all your drive and you're going to go nowhere. And that sense of just cultivating that gentleness and knowing the difference between, I can actually sit down at the desk and I can gently push myself through something, and
okay, now I'm just, I'm procrastinating, knowing the difference when to say I'm healing and I need to take that gentleness, and I still need to be accountable to myself, but I do need to have that gentleness. So that has very much been a shift in my process, writing and reading. And I don't think we talk about it enough, because trauma it changes all of us. And often we are so hard on ourselves for that,
Yeah. I love that you mentioned patience, because honestly, Jenna, that's the lesson that I receive more than anything else right now. It's, oh, you tried to take a step too soon.
Yeah.
Oh, you tried to do something too quickly. Oh, you tried to take on two things when you should have only taken on one.
Yeah.
And it's literally catching myself with all of these unconscious patterns, which are all linked to my career, so therefore they're all linked to creativity, that want to drive me to produce more, to do more, to be more.
Yeah.
And to me, I haven't found a greater mentor than nature, because nature literally can't. I mean, unless we feed it with like super growth fertilizer, but even then it's kind of restricted. Nature can't hustle. She can't just spend £10,000 on Facebook ads and try to go viral overnight. She just can't.
Nature comes to the end of autumn and says, this is winter. I don't care if you want spring. This is the way it needs to be. And yeah, I think sometimes, especially, as writers, when it comes to an opportunity or the gift of something, and you want to be present for it all, and you want to try this and you want to try that. And, I think about when I'm working with my students in mentorship roles and they take on too much or they try something, I would never, ever turn around and say, well, you idiot, you need to balance yourself better. But we do it to ourselves. There's not that gentleness. So that sense of, okay, I took on too much, let it be a lesson. Maybe next time check in with what this body is actually feeling, instead of, oh yeah, I can take on one more thing. As opposed to, if I take on this one more thing, I'm going to crash and then I'm going to have to rebuild, And I think we're so bad at talking to ourselves as writers. Oh.
Well, I mean, I would say, Jenna, that we just are so bad at it, because the majority of us grew up with less sympathy than sympathy, if that makes sense.
It does.
So wherever you were on the spectrum, whether it was like just a lack of sympathy right through to total violence, I think the majority of us have experienced more of that spectrum than soft, gentle witnessing.
Yeah.
And that's really because of the culture. I mean, for me, I'm so ingrained with, come on, we're going to be late. There are certain areas of my life where I find myself rushing, and I catch myself and I'm like, dude, like literally this is a pattern that's 40 years old. And it takes so much strength in that moment to say, oh sweet one, dearest, like every cell in my body is like, how can you speak to yourself in this way? And I'm just like, no, sweet one, dearest, my love, let's take it slow, let's remember to breathe, it's okay. So to me, that's what it looks like. It looks like literally having to take 5 minutes or 1 minute out of your day to just go through the motion of, I'm going to love myself rigorously in this moment. Otherwise, it's not going to change, is it?
Yep. And I feel like that's one of those things that comes outward, like I think we're better at it perhaps doing it in our communities than we are with ourselves, but it's sort of like, kind of like hearing that core of the story. Once you hear it, you can kind of see your way outward a little bit better. Kind of feels a bit like when we learn how to not resolve it, because I don't know for myself I'll ever resolve it, but at least lean into it a little bit more with myself. When I practice it out in the world, it feels more genuine, because it doesn't feel like the core of that practice is rotten. Do you know what I mean? Like I'm being horrible to myself, but I'm able to be kinder to other people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's so interesting, isn't it? That way that
hard.
We wouldn't speak to others the way that we would speak to ourselves, and yet we also speak to others more lovingly than we speak to ourselves.
Yeah. It's like what we've been taught versus I think often who we are. and
Yes.
sometimes who we are is shows beautifully in the world, and then what we've been taught is so hard. It's internalized in such a devastating way. Yeah.
And for me, I find that's why I'm so fascinated with the creative process and so committed to working with writers at this healing level, because I think there's something about the creative process that can mirror the pain that we have with ourselves.
Mm. Is it okay?
That seemed to land. Do you have a sense of
Yeah.
that for
Oh,
you?
I was gonna say, tell me more. Tell me more. I was just.
Oh, well, there's two threads for this theory as I'm developing. I don't yet have the trajectory for this manuscript, Jenna, but there's two threads to this theory. The first is that the creative process mirrors our experience in the womb and our birth process.
Mm, mm,
So, for example, it might be that we were premature, and so we rush headlong into projects. It might be that during the period that we were in our mother's womb, our mothers were outwardly really excited, but unconsciously really terrified, and so our creative process can be fraught with those two battles because they're so ingrained in our system, and we sort of accept it. And then there's the birth process and the sort of aftermath of the birth process. So for me, I was an incubator baby. I was born very premature, almost dead, and then I was incubated. So I've got this incredible tolerance for absolute loneliness and agony.
Oh God.
And that really showed up in my creative process. I've done so much to unravel that pattern. I'm so proud of myself. My love, I'm so proud of you.
Yes.
But I can see periods in my life where I was so alone and so agonized in the creative process, and yet it didn't feel crazy enough to me to be like, what the hell am I doing? And I think that's a sign that it is an echo of a previous trauma or pattern. If we're not like, this makes no sense, we need to do something about this right away. I was putting up with it for well over a decade, thinking this is just my lot. This is this. So yeah, those are the sort of the areas. I don't want to take over this podcast because I'm meant to be interviewing you.
I've been the talking head for. I've just been enjoying listening to this. This is fascinating.
But yeah, what do you have a sense of any patterns that play out in your process?
I mean, again, just kind of being attentive to like some of those tender subjects, but having been a young child who was racially abused because I was a young brown kid in a community that was not. And so very racially targeted, and a lot of the physical and the sexual violence that I experienced was racially targeted. And I learned how to go inward, and I learned how to protect, to avoid shame. To avoid shame for my family, to avoid shame for my community, being like the only brown kid in the school, and that's other people's experiences of your background. And you don't want to be like, oh, well, they're obviously this way, So I went inward, and it impacted my stories in the sense that I often felt like I was leaving out the heart of difficult experiences because I wanted to avoid, again, bringing that sense of shame or exposure or anything like that. And that sense of responsibility, like I can't tell this story, especially when I went to memoir and poetry. If I was writing any kind of confessional poetry, it felt like, okay, the trappings could be beautiful, but the heart was always missing because you're protecting. And at some point, as a writer and as a person, it took me a long time. Like as a person in the world, I wasn't thriving. And as a writer, I felt like I was tired of producing texts that I was told were beautiful, but that I felt were missing something in the heart. And so books like Reverie, where when my editor said, you really need to tell your own story, I was like, I know. And thank you for verifying what my suspicion was. And I was still fighting with that really old fear, and coming out and telling it in the book and learning how to balance it so that it didn't sink the book, and having people come and say, how did you manage that? How did you manage that balance so that you were able to tell your truth and incorporate it and weave it in and still attend to the other issues in the book, you know? And I felt like, okay, maybe I'm learning. Maybe I'm tiptoeing down this path of, you know, that young traumatized kid who wanted to write but felt like she could never really be fully in her texts. You know, maybe I'm learning, and it's taking a long time, but I'm feeling more at home in my writing and definitely more in my body. But it's
I
weird.
feel so moved by that, Jenna. And it's interesting because it makes me think of two phrases that we use in breathwork: titration and pendulation.
Okay.
So the pendulation is the pendulum. We kind of swing in to the trauma or the uncomfortable feelings, and we swing out. We swing in, and by doing that, we slowly heal the memories, the body. And titration is sort of, we sort of adding very slowly. We're sort of drip by drip by drip. Yeah. And as I was listening to you, that was the sense I got, like your writing journey was like sort of gradually becoming more and more aware of what's being missed out. A little bit of like, oh, what do I do about this? Because I think when we're in a breathwork session, we can become aware of an area of pain or a memory or a tension, and then we're like, oh, but what do I do with it? And it's like you got to keep breathing. You got to stay with it. You got to trust the process. You got to keep writing. You got to get that whole cliff, the whole cliff to kind of come out so that you can see it. And slowly you learn how to bring that pain or whatever it is, the aspect of the story, into the work. And then it's like the wholeness, isn't it, that we're all trying to get to the whole self, which is the healed self.
Yeah, absolutely. I love how you put that.
Oh, thank you. I loved how you put it too. I literally do not know where the time has gone.
Oh my gosh.
Seriously, I just
all afternoon.
Yeah, I've so loved exploring the world with you for the last hour or so, Jenna. It's been such a treat for me.
It really has, likewise.
Let's just take a moment just to kind of be with, like, as I'm reflecting everything that we've talked about and shared, and the fact that we've just met. I mean, I'm so grateful that we were able to go on this deep dive into the creative process, the body, trauma, the past, like so many powerful topics. I'm just wondering also if there's anything that came up for you. You're like, oh, I just saw that in a new way. Or was there a question I didn't ask you that you were just dying for me to ask you? Any sort of moment for you to just reflect and share a final thought?
I was thinking a bit about when just our previous discussion there about kind of like telling those truths, telling those deep things and how they surface in our writing and how our writing might change. And I was thinking, it's so strange to feel like, as a writer, you can be bringing yourself to the page over and over through a life and yet still feel like you're a guest in your own writing, because you're kind of still a guest in your own body. You never feel fully at home in there. And what that process of writing through those traumas as a person in the world, just moving those traumas through you, and as a writer, and then going, we talked about memoir, we talked about poetry, and even like how you write fiction, how you attend to your characters then, because it feels like you learn that in yourself and your own experiences, and you're able to kind of move some of that, transmute it into your characters, your fictionalized characters. So your writing just feels like it starts to open up in different ways. But yeah, it's so strange feeling like you're a guest in the thing that you love the most, the art that you love the most, and, in yourself. So that's been kind of blowing my mind open while we were talking. I was like, oh.
It's so powerful, that analogy, or I don't even know the word for it, but to talk about yourself as a guest in your writing and as a guest in your body, like that seems so apt. To me, it makes me think of if we didn't yet learn how to be fully in ourselves, but we feel that urge to create because I think it is such a natural urge to want to pour forth, to want to make sense of.
Mm-hmm.
So we've got this sense of, I don't quite know the full shape of myself, but I know enough about myself to feel that I want to create. And so the two are sort of, we got these two guest states hand in hand, just trying to figure it all out.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that.
So thank you for
Thank
that.
you for that.
It was coming up out of our conversation, so thank you.
Beautiful. Oh, Jenna, yeah, thank you so much for your time. That last reflection was amazing.
Oh, thank you, and thanks for holding this space and sharing this space. It was such a lovely invitation, and I have appreciated it so much.